my session. Myself, Hampika, Engineer of Electronics and Communication Engineering. Today our topic is selection of research design. Whereas research design is a word which defined as the design which is helping out to understand the research work to readers or listeners. Whereas to do research design, we have to select the design based on few criteria. Whereas research designs are plans and the procedures for research that span the decision from the board assumptions to detailed methods of data collection and analysis. Whereas in order to meet the aims and objective of a study, researchers must select the most appropriate design. The selection of a research design largely depends on the nature of the research again. Nature of the research problem, the resources available, such as the cost, time, expertise of the researcher, accessibility of subjects and research ethics. Always the selection of research design supposed to be it always depends on the nature of the research problem or resources available for a researcher and what are the subjects and the research ethics relevant to it, accessibility of a subjects. Whereas what are the factors affecting selection of research design again? To design a research, we use it to select based on few criteria. And what were the factors affecting the research design? Nature of the research problem. This is the most important factor which helps the researcher to decide about the selection of a research design. Based on the nature of research problem or phenomena, researcher decide whether it should be investigated through an experimental or a quasi-experimental or non-experimental approach. Whereas purpose of the study, this is other factor affecting the selection of research design again. Because study may be conducted for the purpose of prediction or description or exploration or correlation of the research variable. Therefore, the purpose of the research study helps the researcher to choose the suitable research design again. If I go with the investigation, then my research design is obviously in a reverse flow. Because the investigation always go with the proofs or evidences available, and based on that, we use it to study the case. We use it to collect the data. Then we use it to go for the selection of a design in a reverse flow. If in case my purpose of study is relevant to academics, then I go with like a pyramid manner. Because the primary target is already fixed by the academics. Based on the criteria, the student or a faculty use it to guide to the student based on the criteria of academics to reach the goal and to give the certification. Then I use it to select the design type as a pyramid or like a flow chart, such a manner, interconnecting manner, and a fixed target oriented design. Whereas if I go with the study of a pure research oriented to resolve a social issue, then I go with a very virtual design, dynamically changing, recycling process. Because to resolve the social issue is our target, then we use it to change the other objectives for sometimes based on the results occurring. So that's the thing, the purpose of study is one of the important factor which affecting the selection of a research design. And researchers' knowledge and experience. Researchers' knowledge and experience means selection of a research design is largely influenced by the researcher's knowledge and experience because they avoid using those designs wherein they lack confidence or relevant knowledge or experience. So that's the thing that researchers' knowledge and experience makes easy to avoid what not designs to choose by a researcher based on their experience, based on their knowledge again. And researchers' interest and motivation. See, interest and motivation levels helps researchers decide about the particular research design. Because as I said, based on the motivation and interest, the researcher used to choose the research design very easily based on their requirement or a particularity, and this helps very easy for a researcher to reach the goal. And motivated researchers always analyze most aspects of research designs before one or a combination, while casual and callous researchers may choose research designs that may lead to failure for sometimes. Because these motivated researchers analysis is always very dynamic and very unpredictable manner. So that's the thing here, the research designs that may lead to failure for sometimes. Whereas research ethics and principles, the incorporation and application of ethical and legal principles in the research design are essential. This includes moral obligations such as respect for participants and their rights, informed consent, and protection from harm, including any adverse effects to educational progress, health, and well being. Because the selection of research design is significantly influenced by the ethics of research. Like, for example, a researcher may be willing to conduct a research study through a certain experimental approach, but problems of ethical approach may stop the researcher to do so, or and she or he may have to settle for another available possible research design. Because always to following research ethics and principles are very very important to do any research work. So that's the thing, based on research ethics and principles, the research design may changes for some time, not static manner, we go with a dynamic manner. Because the selection of research design is significantly influenced by the ethics of a research study. Again, the other example may be willing of conducting a research study through experimental problems of ethical approach may stop researcher to do and may have settled the research possibilities of a selection of a research design again. And here there are a few subjects and are participants. This means the number and availability of a study subject may influence the selection of research design. If only few subjects are involved, in-depth qualitative researcher may opt for a qualitative research design. And the resources. Resources is other part. None of the researchers can conduct without resources such as money, equipment, facilities, support from the organization or institution, and colleagues. So, however, some of the studies require more amount of resources as compared to the others. So, therefore, the selection of research design may be affected by the availability of resources for the research study again. So, resources always plays very crucial role on the research work. So that's the thing. This is also one of the factor which affecting the selection of a research design again. And the time, which is very crucial to do any task, especially again in a research. Time is money is a beautiful quotation which always have more impact on research. So the time is also one of the major deciding factor for the selection of a research design. For example, researchers need more time to conduct longitudinal studies, while cross-sectional studies may be conducted in this shorter time. So therefore, time is also a significant contributing factor of selection of a research design. When I go with a research design with a time saving factor, automatically it gives a more impact to give a good quality of research. If I choose the way which is very long, if I choose the design which is very long time taking, it is not at all a preferable or a good impact on a research. Uses of the study findings. A study design also varies methods of data collection and data analysis. Therefore, while choosing a research design, researcher must ensure that research design is an appropriate for the users of the study findings as possible, so that maximum advantages of research results can be obtained. Whereas the possible control on extraneous variables. An efficient design can maximize the result, decrease the errors, and control pre-existing or impaired conditions that may affect the outcome of the study. The maximized efforts of the researcher should maximize control. Therefore, the possible controller that extraneous variables may affect the selection of a research design. Like for example, a researcher would conduct a study through true experimental design because of inability to control a selected extraneous variable. Other similar design has to be opted for, such as quasi-experimental or a pre-experimental research design. Because based on the possible control and extraneous variable always have a impact on a research for a time and a financial factor again. So that's the thing, the maximum efforts of researchers should maximum control. So this efficient design can maximize the results and decreases the error. Automatically then it controls the pre-existing or impaired conditions that may affect the outcome of the study. So based on this factor, the research design used to be selected again. And what are the types of research design again? An introduction to the data collection. Whereas there are different kinds of research designs. One is the explanatory research design, the other one is a descriptive research design, the other one is a diagnostic research design. The final one is the experimental research design. These are the few types of a research design. Again, in general, research designs are classified into two broad categories and several subtypes again. The main two types are like a quantitative research design and a qualitative research design. Whereas we studied about the research methods based on the qualitative research method and a quantitative research method. Even in a research design also, the main categories are like a qualitative and a quantitative. Whereas in a quantitative research design, it goes with the experimental and the non-experimental and others. Whereas, what are the important concepts relating to the research design again? See, before describing the different research designs, it will be appropriate to explain the various concepts relating to research design. so that these may be better and easily understood. The dependent and independent variables, a concept which can take on different quantitative values, is called a variable. As such, the concepts like weight, height, income, these all are the examples of the variables which are dynamic. Whereas a qualitative phenomena are also quantified on the basis of the absence of the concerning attributes, phenomenon which can take unintentionally different values even in a decimal point, called continuous variables. And whereas this extraneous variable is the other part which is called independent variable, that are not related to the purpose of study but may affect the dependent variable and termed as extraneous variable. Suppose the researcher wants to test the hypothesis that there is a relationship between child's design and a social studies achievement, and there is their self concepts again. In this case, the concept is an independent variable and social studies achievement is an dependent variable. And the other one is the control. The one of the important concepts relating to the research design is the control plays one of the important characteristics of a good research design to minimize influence or affect the extraneous variables. The technical term control is used when we design the study minimizing the effects of extraneous independent variable. Whereas in experimental researches, the term control is used to refer the restraint experiments conditions. And confound relationship. When the dependent variable is not free from the influence of extraneous variables, the relationship between the dependent and independent variables is to be confounded by an extraneous variables. Whereas research hypothesis, already we discussed in detail in a previous section on a topic of a hypothesis. When a prediction or hypothesis relationship is to be tested by scientific methods, it is termed as research hypothesis. The research hypothesis is a predictive statement that relates dependent variable to a independent variable to a dependent variable. Whereas experimental and non-experimental hypothesis testing again. When the purpose of research is to test a research hypothesis, it is termed as hypothesis testing research. It can be the experimental design or the non-experimental design also. And research in which the independent variable is manipulated is termed as experimental hypothesis research design. And a research in which an independent variable is not manipulated is called non-experimental hypothesis testing research. Experimental and control groups. In an experimental hypothesis testing research, when a group is exposed to usual conditions, it is termed as a control group. But when a group is exposed to some novel or a special condition, it is termed as an experimental group. Whereas the treatments, the different conditions under the experimental and control groups are put as usually referred as treatments. In the illustration taken above, the two treatments are the usual studies program and the special studies program. Experiment is a word which the processing of examining the truth of statistical hypothesis relating to some research problem is known as experiment. For example, we can conduct an experiment to examine the usefulness of a newly developed drug. Then experiments can be of two types: absolute experiment or comparative experiment again. and experimental units. The predetermined plots or the blocks where the different treatments are used are known as experimental units. Such experimental units must be selected very carefully. And here, the main topic, introduction of data collection. What is data collection? Again, why we are collecting the data? Data collection is a term used to describe a process of preparing and collecting data. Generally, the data collection itself a word, collecting the data or process of preparing and collecting the data. Whereas systematic gathering of data for a particular purpose from various sources that has been systematically observed or recorded or organized. Data are the best basic inputs to any decision making process in business again. And before going to the classification of data, to collect data there is a purpose. What was the purpose of data collection again? Either for a recording purpose, as a proof, or as for a reference, or for a base. And what are the classifications of data again? Generally, data is two types. One is a primary data, the other one is a secondary data. Here, primary data, name itself, it was a primary, which is a original or a origin of a data collecting. We started as a primary data. So that's the thing, primary data is always a original data. The data which are collected from the field under the control and supervision of an investigator. Primary data means original data that has been collected specially for the purpose in mind. These type of data are generally a fresh and collected for the first time, because as a primary itself, that was the first step. So this is the first time collected data, and it is useful for a current studies as well for a future studies. For example, your own questionnaire, a researcher's own perspective of thinking. Based on this, data used to be collected by a concerned researcher. So that was the very original, first time collection of the requirement. So this is called a primary data. Whereas primary research again have two types, which call quantitative data and qualitative data. Whereas quantitative and qualitative information, what is again a quantitative and a qualitative? So quantitative is always based on numbers, which comes with a survey part. Qualitative is more detailed, and it is tells you how, when, and where. Whereas quantitative involves with a numerical and a satisfactory research and projectable to a broader population. Whereas there are few sampling methods called random samples, and what are the Stratford or a segment random sampling. The other one is a quota sampling. And again, qualitative research. The qualitative research includes in-depth, insight generating, non-numerical, directional, and what are the common techniques generally. The personal interviews and focus groups generally go with the common techniques for it. And here the qualitative research methods. What are the research methods involved in a qualitative part? The observation method, through personal or observation. The personal interview, it always includes a questionnaire part, the interview itself. The telephone interview, through telecall, the interview is to be connected via questionnaire or a interaction. Again, it includes mail survey, even through mail, even it includes a questionnaires. Whereas the quantitative research, which includes with a stratified or a segment random samples. This quanta samples is nothing but again by segment, not randomly selected. Specific number on each segment are interviewed, so may not be fully representative and a cheaper method. So here again go with the secondary data. Whereas what was the real purpose of collecting data or for a data collection? Simply the purpose of data collection is either to be obtain information or to be keep on record or to make decisions about important issues or to pass information on to others. Whereas what are the sources included in it? External sources. External sources of secondary data are usually for a financial applications, either with a journals or books or magazines or a newspaper or libraries or the internet. All these are the external sources of a secondary data, usually for a financial application. Because a journal or a paid journal or a book, we use it to go with the financial part. And what are the external sources for a secondary data are usually financial applications. And what are the real advantages and limitations with this secondary data again? Generally, the basic advantages of a secondary data is always ease of access, and it is one of the low cost to acquire, and it was very clarification of a research question. It may answer a research question. And what are the limitations again? The quality of research not specific to researchers' need actually, because secondary data itself, the secondary data is already collected by some other existing person based on their requirement, and we are taking it as a reference. So that's the reason secondary data always have a sources like a journal in a published manner, or for sometimes in a referenced manner through libraries or the internet. So the major limitation is like a quality of research, which is already existing or discussed with some other persons, not specific to the researcher's need for sometimes. Incomplete information, because every secondary data have some limitations, so that's the thing, it have some incompletion of a information provided, and it is not timely generally. So this is the one of the data collection flow, because here the major origin is the data sources, which is splitted into two types. One is a primary data, the other one is a secondary data source. Whereas what is primary data? Primary data is always the first time collected data and which is original according to their requirement. Whereas secondary data is always collected by a other one which is using or recognized relevantly to our work. So that was the secondary data source. So secondary data source is always existing related, so it has some internal records and it has a published data. So that's the thing, external sources are existing with a secondary data source. What are those external sources? External sources is nothing but published data and standardized sources of marketing and the internet. And nowadays, so not only for researchers, this internet is a part of their lifestyle to discuss or to know anything. So that's the thing, secondary data source having the external source with the internet and published data. And published data is in the form of two categories, either in electronic or in a printed. If I go with the proceeding book of the international conferences, then they'll provide as a proceeding book printable, and when we go through it, we have a lot of published articles on that particular proceedings. If it is really relevant to our work, we can take from the published data conference proceedings. That is a printable. Whereas the other part is electronic. Nowadays, more than a printable, these e-books and electronic data is very hugely content publishing. For a readers or for a researcher or for academicians, for marketing strategy persons, everyone, for a businessman, like simply for a kid to scientist, this electronic data is very huge impact on their regular activities. So what are the internal records again? Whereas these all are the external sources, then the internal records are containing the sales or results of patronage and marketing activity, the cost information, the distributor reports and feedback, and customer feedback. All these feedbacks comes under the internal record. Whereas this electronic and printed form generally tie up with a government or a trade associations or a periodicals or a newspapers or a books or annual reports or a private studies. In the manner of all these things, it used to be. Whereas the standardized sources of marketing, which comes with the store audits, warehouse withdraw and services, consumer purchase panels, all these comes under the standardized sources of marketing. And even these attribution panels, multimedia services, all these. Here, this is a very brief explanation about this data collection flow. Thank you. Thank you so much for your valuable listening. We'll meet in further sections. Thank you.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.